The scream came before the splash. It cut through the quiet Saturday morning of Alder Creek, Oregon, sharp enough to startle birds off telephone wires and make a man 3 houses down pause mid-sip of burnt diner coffee. It wasn't the scream of fear exactly, more the sound a person makes when pride slips on wet tile and reality reaches out with both hands. Inside a narrow blue ranch house on Maple Hollow Drive, Ethan Caldwell stood ankle-deep in soapy water, staring at the living proof that the universe had a sense of humor and had chosen him as today's punchline. The dog, a 90-pound golden retriever named Rufus, shook himself like a malfunctioning lawn sprinkler. Water hit the walls, the mirror, Ethan's chest, his face, the open doorway. It sprayed down the hall toward the living room where an old plaid couch, rescued from a curb 5 years earlier, absorbed the moisture with a defeated sigh. Shampoo bubbles clung to the ceiling light like tiny white regrets. And Ethan just stood there, dripping, stunned, holding a plastic dog shampoo bottle as if it had personally betrayed him. If this were a movie, and some days Ethan suspected his life was a low-budget indie with no soundtrack, this would be the opening shot. The kind that tells you everything you need to know in the first 3 seconds, the mess, the man, and the quiet truth that he had absolutely no idea what he was doing. Outside, Alder Creek looked peaceful. Early spring rain misted the sidewalks, soft and constant, the kind that made the town smell like wet cedar and soil waking up after winter. American flags hung limp on porches, darkened by moisture. Pickup trucks lined driveways. Somewhere a lawn mower coughed to life and died again, defeated by the weather. It was the kind of town where people waved even when they didn't know your name, where high school football banners stayed up year-round, and where everyone noticed when something, or someone, went wrong. Inside the house, everything was going wrong. Ethan Caldwell was 32 years old, 6 feet tall on a good day, with the build of a former high school athlete who'd traded muscle for stress and cheap takeout. His brown hair was permanently undecided about which direction it wanted to go. He wore an old gray hoodie with the name of a long-closed hardware store printed across the chest and sweatpants that had seen better decades. His face, normally calm, a little tired, quietly kind, now carried the expression of a man realizing that his rock bottom might involve dog shampoo. Rufus barked happily, tail wagging, tongue lolling, thrilled by the chaos he had personally engineered. "Don't you dare," Ethan warned weakly, knowing it was useless. Rufus shook again. More water. More soap. More proof that this was not the big break Ethan had imagined when he woke up that morning. Just 6 hours earlier, things had felt hopeful. Not good, not great, but hopeful in the way a lottery ticket feels hopeful before the numbers crush you. Ethan had woken up to the sound of rain tapping the bedroom window, a soft rhythm against the glass. The bedroom was small, barely enough space for the bed, a mismatched dresser, and a folding chair that served as both desk and reminder of better plans. The walls were painted an optimistic beige by a landlord who'd never lived there. A space heater hummed in the corner, fighting the Oregon chill. Ethan stared at the ceiling for a long moment, listening to the rain, letting the weight of another day settle on his chest. Unemployed for 8 months. Savings gone. Job applications unanswered. A degree in communications that felt more decorative than useful. And a dog who needed a bath. Rufus had belonged to Ethan's dad, Martin Caldwell, a man who believed in firm handshakes, early mornings, and the idea that work, any honest work, could save a person. When Martin passed 2 years earlier, Rufus came with the house, the memories, and the unspoken expectation that Ethan would somehow figure things out. "All right," Ethan had muttered that morning, sitting up and rubbing his face. "Today we do something productive." Rufus thumped his tail against the bed in agreement, shedding golden fur like confetti. The idea had come to Ethan while scrolling through his phone, lying in bed, avoiding reality like a professional. A local Facebook group, Alder Creek Neighbors Friends, buzzed with posts about lost cats, church bake sales, and complaints about potholes. One post stood out. "Spring is here. Anyone know affordable dog grooming?" Posted by Linda Harper. Ethan stared at the screen. Affordable dog grooming. He looked at Rufus. Rufus looked back, eyes innocent, fur, not. Ethan had laughed out loud. A short, surprised sound. "I can do that," he'd said, mostly to himself. He'd grown up bathing dogs. How hard could it be? Soap, water, towel, done. And more importantly, money. The thought lodged itself in his brain, stubborn and bright. A small town service. Cash jobs. Something honest. Something immediate. By 8:15 a.m., Ethan had posted, "Hey neighbors. I'm offering basic dog baths from home today, affordable, gentle, and local. DM me, Ethan Caldwell. It wasn't a business plan. It was survival wearing optimism. By 9:02 a.m., Linda Harper had replied. By 9:17, so had Tom Reyes. By 9:30, Ethan had a list of 5 dogs scheduled across the weekend. It felt like oxygen. He showered, shaved halfway, changed his hoodie, and ate cereal straight from the box. He cleaned the bathroom as best he could, which wasn't saying much. He dragged out the old plastic kiddie pool from the garage, then abandoned it because it didn't fit through the hallway. That should have been his first warning. Now, standing in the flooded bathroom, Ethan realized the universe had been screaming quietly all morning, and he'd been too busy pretending this was his comeback montage to listen. A knock sounded at the front door. Ethan froze. Another knock, firmer. "Ethan?" called a woman's voice. "It's Linda." Rufus barked, thrilled by the audience. "Oh no," Ethan whispered. Water sloshed as he stepped out of the bathroom, leaving wet footprints across the hall like evidence at a crime scene. He wiped his hands on his hoodie, which only spread the dampness. When he opened the door, Linda Harper stood on the porch under a floral umbrella, rain dotting her glasses. She was in her early 50s, short, energetic, wearing a bright yellow rain jacket that made her look permanently prepared for optimism. At her feet sat Daisy, a small white terrier wrapped in a pink leash, impeccably clean. Linda smiled. Then she looked past Ethan. Then she blinked. Then she sniffed. "Is that dog shampoo?" she asked. Behind Ethan, Rufus trotted into view, dripping, foamy, tail wagging, leaving a trail of suds across the hardwood floor. There was a long pause. Ethan swallowed. "This," he said carefully, "is a learning experience." Linda stared. Then, unexpectedly, she laughed. Not politely, not awkwardly. She laughed like someone who had lived long enough to recognize a man trying his best while failing loudly. "Well," she said, stepping inside, shaking rain from her umbrella, "you promised affordable. You didn't promise dry." Ethan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Outside, the rain kept falling. Inside, water pooled, soap bubbled, and somewhere between embarrassment and effort, something quietly important began to take shape. Linda Harper rolled up her sleeves like she was stepping into a bake sale emergency instead of a flooded bathroom. She set her umbrella by the door, bent down to greet Rufus, and immediately got a lick across the cheek that left a clean stripe through the soap. "Well," she said, laughing, "at least he's enthusiastic." Ethan stood there, heat crawling up his neck. "I swear I've done this before," he said, which was technically true if you counted childhood summers 20 years ago and dogs that weighed less than a sack of flour. Daisy, the terrier, watched from the doorway with judgmental eyes, as if filing a formal complaint. Linda surveyed the hallway, the damp couch, the trail of bubbles. "You know," she said kindly, "most people quit right about here." Ethan shrugged. "I've had practice not quitting." They worked together, mopping, laughing, improvising. Linda told stories about Alder Creek in the 90s, about when the mill closed and half the town had to reinvent itself or leave. Ethan listened while wringing towels, the words landing heavier than the water. Another knock came. Then another. By noon, Ethan's living room looked like a low-budget animal spa run by optimism and duct tape. Tom Reyes arrived with Bruno, a nervous German Shepherd mix. Sarah Kim showed up with her aging beagle, Winston, who moved like he'd already accepted whatever fate awaited him. Someone brought coffee. Someone else brought donuts. The rain outside turned steady, drumming on roofs like applause for effort. At one point, Rufus escaped the bathroom entirely and sprinted through the house, soaking everyone, sliding across the hardwood like a golden torpedo. Ethan chased him, slipped, and landed flat on his back. There was a beat of silence. Then the entire room erupted in laughter. Ethan lay there, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazily, soaked to the bone, pride officially dissolved. And for the first time in months, he laughed too. Deep, uncontrollable laughter that shook something loose in his chest. Later, as the chaos settled and the dogs dried under mismatched towels, Linda pressed folded bills into Ethan's hand. "You earned this," she said. Ethan looked at the money. Not much, but real. Outside, the rain slowed. A weak stripe of sunlight broke through the clouds, catching on wet pavement and making the whole street shine. Ethan stood on his porch, hoodie damp, hands wrinkled, watching neighbors talk, dogs wag, life continue. He realized something quietly monumental. The bath hadn't failed. He had. And then, he hadn't quit. That night, after the last towel was hung and the house smelled faintly of dog shampoo and donuts, Ethan sat on the couch with Rufus's head on his knee. His phone buzzed non-stop. You doing this again? My cousin needs her lab washed. Can you come by next weekend? Ethan smiled, tired to the bone, soaked in ways that went deeper than water. Tomorrow, he knew, would still be hard. But tonight, he'd learned something Alder Creek already understood. Sometimes success doesn't arrive clean. Sometimes it shows up dripping, laughing, and asking if you're brave enough to keep going. The rain didn't stop in Alder Creek just because Ethan Caldwell figured something out. That was the first lesson of Scene 2, though it took him weeks to admit it. Spring slid forward the way it always did in that part of Oregon, slow, damp, stubborn. The sky stayed low and gray, mornings smelled like wet pavement and pine needles, and the town moved at its usual unhurried pace, as if nothing dramatic had happened inside one small blue house on Maple Hollow Drive. But something had happened. Ethan felt it every time his phone buzzed. The first week after the dog bath disaster, the buzzers were friendly. Neighbors asking if he could wash another dog. Someone asking if he did nails he didn't. Someone else asking if he'd consider coming to their place because their bathtub was emotionally attached to cleanliness. The second week, the buzzers changed. People started calling it a business. Hey, Ethan, Tom Reyes said one afternoon when Ethan was crouched on Tom's driveway, rinsing Bruno with a garden hose while the dog looked personally offended. You ever think about charging more? Ethan snorted. I'm thinking about not flooding my house again. Tom laughed, leaning against his faded red pickup. Tom was 40, broad-shouldered, with the posture of a man who'd worked construction since high school and carried both pride and arthritis in his back. I'm serious. Folks trust you. That's worth something. Trust. The word stuck with Ethan long after Bruno shook water all over Tom's jeans. Trust was new. For most of the past year, people had looked at Ethan with that careful sympathy reserved for men who used to have plans. Former classmates saw him at the grocery store and said things like, "So what are you up to these days?" in voices already bracing for disappointment. Family friends mentioned job leads that went nowhere. Everyone meant well. Now they handed him leashes and house keys. By May, Ethan's weekends disappeared. His weekdays followed. He washed dogs before noon, afternoon, sometimes by porch light when the sun dropped early. He bought better shampoo, then better towels, then a folding table. He learned which dogs hated water, which loved it, and which needed silence more than soap. Rufus became his unofficial assistant. The golden retriever sat nearby during every job, tail-thumping encouragement, as if supervising Ethan's redemption. Kids in the neighborhood started waving at Rufus before they waved at Ethan. Someone made a joke about Rufus being management. Ethan laughed along, but late at night, when his hands ached and the house smelled permanently of wet fur, doubt crept back in. This wasn't the dream. This wasn't the degree. This wasn't the version of success he'd imagined when he'd moved back home after his dad died, promising himself it was temporary. One Thursday evening, after a long day and a short temper, Ethan sat on the porch steps with Rufus, staring at the streetlights flickering on. Rain misted the air again, soft but relentless. What if this is it? Ethan muttered. What if this is as far as I go? Rufus leaned his full weight against him, warm and solid. The next morning, a white envelope waited in the mailbox. Inside was a notice from the city. Unlicensed commercial activity. Ethan read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring. Someone, no name listed, had complained. He needed permits, insurance, zoning approval, things that cost money. He sat at the kitchen table, hands flat, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain on the roof. This was the moment, the one that decides stories. He could stop. He could tell people he was taking a break. He could retreat back into applications and waiting and quiet disappointment. Instead, he stood up. Ethan walked straight down the street to Linda Harper's house. Linda answered the door in an apron dusted with flour, hair pulled back, glasses crooked. Ethan, everything okay? He held up the notice. I think I accidentally became a business. Linda read it, lips pursed. Then she smiled the way she had that first disastrous day. Oh honey, come in. You're going to need coffee. Word spread the way it always did in Alder Creek, fast and personal. Tom Reyes knew a guy at City Hall. Sarah Kim helped him fill out forms at her dining table, her kids coloring quietly nearby. Linda organized a Saturday fundraiser without asking permission. On a drizzly afternoon that felt more like winter than spring, the community center parking lot filled with cars. Handwritten signs read "Dog Wash for Ethan and support local." People brought dogs. People brought casseroles. Someone brought a speaker playing old rock songs too loud. Ethan stood there in borrowed rubber boots, stunned. This feels like cheating, he said to Linda. She shook her head. This feels like community. By summer, Ethan had permits. By late summer, he had a used van with peeling paint and a logo hand-painted by a high school art student. By fall, he had a routine. The work was still wet. Still messy. Still humbling. But it was his. One crisp October morning, with leaves stuck to sidewalks and frost on windshields, Ethan locked up the house and paused. He looked back at the blue siding, the porch where it started, the door that had opened on embarrassment and laughter. Rufus sat beside him, older now, slower, but steady. Ethan smiled. Success, he'd learned, wasn't a clean reveal. It was a series of soaked moments you chose not to run from. And sometimes, if you stayed long enough, those moments became something worth keeping. You don't rise because you never fall. You rise because you keep standing, wet, embarrassed, and still willing to try.
Like and subscribe if you want to be happy and motivate.